The year was 2004 and Greece was at its peak, hosting the Olympics, investing in infrastructure, and as always, enchanting the world with its natural beauties. But behind the facade of Mediterranean beauty, an economic storm was slowly brewing. The 2000s were a time of optimism and pride for Greece, and the Athens Olympic Games were an event that brought promise of national greatness and global recognition. However, this period also saw Greece facing chronic economic challenges that cast a shadow over the fleeting success of the Olympics. Then came the 2008 crisis, which had a profound impact on Greece. The tourism sector, a significant source of revenue for the country, was affected, with tourist arrivals dropping due to global economic uncertainty. Greece relied on international financial bailouts to avoid collapse, implementing structural reforms to secure assistance. From the beginning of the decade, Greece found itself sinking deeper into loan debt, to the point of owing more than 300 billion euros and becoming the first developed country to default on the International Monetary Fund. A scandalous and billion-dollar default, the largest in the institution's history. Creditors demanded serious measures and a firm hand from Greece in exchange for help, and the inhabitants of what once was seen as one of the best countries to live in began to feel the drama of the recession. In 2015, the unemployment rate was the highest in the European Union, reaching 26%, and the so-called austerity measures haunt Greeks to this day. The repulsion towards the measures was such that in 2015 the country refused to follow the conditions imposed by creditors to secure aid. The decision was made through a referendum, with over 60% of Greek citizens showing opposition to the changes. Greece's refusal to accept these conditions led to a period of uncertainty and tension in relations between Greece and its creditors, known as the 2015 Greek debt crisis. So, how did Greece reach this point? What is so bad about these measures that citizens prefer billion-dollar debt to them? And did the country truly overcome the crisis? Located on the Balkan Peninsula, Greece is strategically positioned between Europe, Asia, the Middle East, and Africa, with a population of 11 million people. Its economic relies heavily on tourism, which accounts for more than 15% of its GDP, and exports of products like olive oil. However, since the 2000s, Greece had been increasingly incurring debt, with government spending on salaries and public services, as well as the high costs associated with the Athens Olympics in 2004. But Greece's problems began even earlier. In 1999, when the European Union launched the euro, intended to be the currency used by all member countries, Greece was initially going to be left out. At the time, despite suffering from extremely high tax problems, the country spent a lot on social benefits and salaries, so its debt was already very high. Greece had significant debt and was trying to reduce its budget deficit to meet the Maastricht Treaty criteria for joining the Eurozone. The Maastricht Treaty, signed in 1992, was set to later introduce the euro as a single currency in some European Union countries. The treaty defined economic criteria and fiscal stability for countries wishing to adopt the euro, including a planned or actual government deficit relative to GDP of 3% and government debt relative to GDP of no more than 60%. Not meeting the requirements, the Greek government had two sensible choices to make: cut spending or stay out. But apparently, neither was appealing enough since they chose a third option, to disguise data. The country distorted its finances to join the Eurozone with a budget deficit well above 3% and a debt level above 100% of GDP. But with a little help from American investment bank Goldman Sachs, Greece concealed part of its debt in 2001 through complex credit swap transactions. The Greeks essentially told the European Union they owed less than they actually did. And so, in 2001, Greece officially became part of the Eurozone. The adoption brought several advantages. Now they could negotiate on equal terms with other Union countries and secure better financing. So good that they could even host the 2004 Olympics. The economy was growing, European Union money was coming in, and nobody suspected a thing. Well, maybe. In 2004, when they hosted the Olympic Games, Greece's budget deficit reached 6.1% according to them, and the debt relative to GDP exceeded 111%. These numbers indicated that the country was facing serious financial challenges and an unsustainable fiscal situation. Seeing this, in 2005, the European Commission decided to place the country under fiscal monitoring. However, between 2000 and 2007, the country sustained an economic growth of about 4.1% per year, compared to 2.5% of the European Union. So, even though the debt continued to grow, things weren't so terrible yet. And as long as the economy continued like this, Greece would not collapse. But no one counted on the global recession of 2008. When the real estate market crashed in the United States, the whole world was affected, including Europe, a major partner of the Americans. The banking crisis and the global credit crisis lasted until 2009, causing the cost of loans to increase, and Greece stopped receiving aid. Thus, the country's debt continued to grow. Here, Greece already had enough reasons to regret adopting the euro because it was bringing more problems than solutions to the economy, since the country was forbidden from resorting to some extreme recovery measures, such as printing money, since only the European Central Bank could do that. And things continued to get worse. Due to the financial distortion the Greek government orchestrated to be accepted in the Eurozone, in 2009 George Papandreou won the prime ministerial elections, and a few weeks after taking office revealed that the Greece's budget deficit was over 12%, almost double of what had been declared before. Later the figure was revised and it was found to be more than 15%. And to make matters worse, in 2010 Greek debt was downgraded to junk status, meaning there was a high chance of the country defaulting, and therefore the cost of borrowing for them increased. So, as if not enough to be drowning in debt, Greece now had lost the trust of the European Union with its lies, and its reputation was trashed. But when all seemed lost, the Troika came to the country's rescue. The group formed by European Commission, the International Monetary Fund, and the European Central Bank decided to help Greece to avoid the rest of the European Union suffering from the crisis. Initially, they loaned 110 billion euros, but in return they asked that the government increase taxes and decrease public spending to start making money again. And that's where the dreaded austerity measures and problems began. Austerity is an economic policy that involves cutting government spending, increasing taxes, and taking economic control measures to reduce budget deficits and control public debt. Upon accepting the Troika's loan, Prime Minister Papandreou committed to securing 30 billion euros precisely through austerity measures such as spending cuts and tax increases. However, the measures that he used for this weighed heavily on Greek citizens. Poverty and unemployment increased and the population's purchasing power drastically fell. Until 2011, amid the Greeks' anger over austerity measures, Prime Minister Papandreou considered holding a national referendum to consult the population on a second bailout agreement. But he cancelled the referendum after the opposition agreed to support the New Deal and was forced to resign. After the resignation, Loukas Papademos took charge and began implementing the new measures. In 2012, the second bailout for Greece was approved, this time worth 130 billion euros. At the time, The Guardian reported that the decision had been made after 14 hours of negotiations and amid protests by part of the population, who feared even stricter measures for the government to fulfill its part of the plan, which consisted of reducing Greek debt from 160% to 120.5% of its GDP by 2020. In the following years, Greece's situation remained complicated, and the rules for spending cuts became increasingly unpopular among the population. In 2013, the country approved more austerity measures, with layoffs of more than 20,000 public employees, salary cuts, and other budget cuts to secure another installment of the bailout plan of almost 7 billion euros. In 2014, the Greek economy managed to exit the recession and grew by 0.8%, but besides not improving the quality of life for the majority of the population, it was a scenario that lasted only a short time, as the economy receded again at the end of the year. In an article published by BBC in 2015, when asked about the effectiveness of austerity measures, Paul Krugman and Joseph Stiglitz, Nobel Prize winners in economics in 2008 and 2001, said that the measures did not improve the situation of prospects of Greece. At the time, it was estimated that the country's economy has shrunk by 25% since the start of these measures, which further increased its need for loans. The unemployment rate was at 26% and reached more than 60% among young people, the highest in the entire European Union. 45% of retirees were poor, and according to UNICEF, 40% of children were below the poverty line. It was in this context that in January 2015, the Greeks elected the Syriza party, which had an anti-austerity stance and promised a renegotiation of the debt terms. In June, the government missed the deadline for a payment of 1.6 billion euros to the International Monetary Fund, and Greece became the first developed country to default on the fund. A month later, the population voted no to the new restrictions demanded by creditors to extend the bailout funds. Greece's situation had become unsustainable, pushing the country to the brink of leaving the Eurozone. So, despite the Greek population's vote against new austerity measures, Prime Minister Alexis Tsipras pushed the parliament to approve them, amid to secure another bailout program, this time worth 86 billion euros. In August, the government yielded to the measures in exchange for the 86 billion to be delivered by 2018. After the IMF pressed and stated that the Greece's debt was unsustainable, creditors agreed to ease up on budgetary targets but refused to relieve the debt. Finally, Alexis Tsipras agreed to the new fiscal and pension reforms, despite them meaning a weakening economy and more poverty. In April 2018, the Greek economy recorded growth for the fifth consecutive quarter. In August of the same year, the country received its last loan from the third and final bailout program, stated it would continue to manage its finances, accepted EU supervision for the next 4 years, and imposed more austerity measures. At the time, the European Union considered the bailout a success. But were they right? Although it exited the bailout program in 2018, Greece left owing the EU and the IMF almost 300 billion euros, with a debt at 100% of the GDP. Moreover, the country continued with an above-normal unemployment rate. In 2019, Kyriakos Mitsotakis took office as the Prime Minister of Greece. Just like the 2008 crisis, the pandemic significantly hit Greece. The tourism sector, which accounts for more than 20% of the Greek GDP and it's concentrated in the summer months, experienced a sharp decline in tourist arrivals from abroad. Domestic restrictions to contain the virus also had an impact, causing its debt to rise to 212% of GDP in 2020. However, in 2022, as predicted, the European Union stopped monitoring the Greek budget, formally marking the end of the crisis. Since the end of its bailout program in 2018, Greece has regained access to the bond market and reduced its debt as a proportion of gross domestic product to 171% in 2022. Now, after a series of restrictive measures that are far from over and Mitsotakis' successful recovery plan in the country, it has become one of the fastest growing in the European bloc. And more, the risk rating agency S&P has just changed Greece's outlook from stable to positive. Of course, the scenario is still not the best. The country still has one of the highest rates of relative poverty in the EU. Unemployment remains above the European average, and until May 2023, when the minimum wage was increased, it was lower than 12 years ago, contributing to the thousands of job vacancies that remain open in critical sectors of the economy, such as tourism, construction, and food service. But it's fair to say that Greece is gradually recovering, and authorities have been optimistic about this recovery. GDP has been growing, tourism took off in 2022, and the country recorded a 50% increase in direct investment also in 2022. By 2026, the reform plan called Greece 2.0 anticipates 106 investment measures and 68 reforms. Before the crisis in the early 2000s, imprudent financial management with excessive spending and lack of fiscal control put Greece and its citizens in a precarious situation. The subsequent austerity measures and tax increases, although necessary to deal with the debt crisis, ended up having a significant impact on the Greek population, which had to endure cuts in public services and face a rising unemployment rate. 15 years after the catastrophe, an entire generation was born and grew up living in a constant crisis. Brain drain, unemployment, political instability, and rising poverty significantly affect the population. And 15 years is a long time for a nation to be working on solutions to these problems, when in fact, good economic policy and fiscal stability could prevent all of this. So what do you think about the huge crisis Greece went through? Leave a comment below. Now, if you want to learn more about the so-called Shark Tank effect and its power on small businesses, click on this video that's on screen right now. I'm sure you'll enjoy it. That's it for this video. I see you on the next one.